minus 20, still counting at this time. We have ignition sequence start. 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. We have ignited.
General program started. Our vehicle going now to an azimuth heading of 72 degrees. All 5 F1 engines starting.
Good afternoon and welcome to the ATCO SpaceLab Speaker Series. My name is Claire Porbet and I'm a platform specialist with the transformation team at ATCO, and I'll be your moderator today. I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Indigenous peoples that are traditional custodians of the land that we are on today. I'll take a moment to reflect on the meaning of place, and in doing so, recognize the various traditional, ancestral, and unceded lands on which ATCO supports communities and customers, and I offer each of us the opportunity to do the same, wherever you are joining us from today. I am honored to live and work in Treaty 7, the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, Niitsitapi, comprised of Siksika, Kainai, and Piikani nations, the Tsuut'ina Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The city of Calgary, Mohkinstsis, is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. I'd also like to pay my respect to elders past and present and upcoming in the communities and regions where we operate. Now, a quick comment on the technical side of things before we get started. Today's lecture is a one-way video and audio format. Please ask questions by using the question icon to the right of your screen, and we will open question functionality shortly after starting today's lecture. I'd like to hand it over to my colleague Justin Young, Manager of Transformation at ATCO, to introduce the speaker series and our speaker today.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you all for joining us today for our third ATCO SpaceLab Speaker Series event of 2023. These lectures are a chance for us to share knowledge and insights from thought leaders, providing our ATCO colleagues and ATCO's network of peers, partners, and friends with information on promising developments, trends, and leadership in exciting and relevant fields. We previously heard from Dr. Michael Hart, Vice Provost and Associate Vice President, Research, Indigenous Engagement for the University of Calgary on May 4th. If you missed Dr. Hart's lecture, you can visit ATCO's YouTube channel to watch a recording of that event. If this is the first time you've heard about the ATCO transformation team, we can't wait to tell you a bit more. In addition to presenting this series, ATCO's transformation team also leads ATCO SpaceLab. SpaceLab is an enterprise-wide framework of collaborative support for the creative energy of our colleagues. SpaceLab is a source of funding and expertise for any ATCO employee wanting to test and achieve sustainable new value for the company and our customers. And I'm happy to say that since the fall of 2019, nearly 130 projects have been initiated as part of SpaceLab. Today we are joined by Dr. Maxim Bazhenov from the University of California, San Diego. We are excited to hear more about the key features and mechanisms of sleep in the brain, along with some of his recent findings on the application of sleep-related concepts in computational models of brain networks and artificial intelligence. Dr. Maxim Bazhenov's research revolves around gaining a comprehensive understanding of how the brain processes information and acquires knowledge. His main areas of research encompass exploring the role of sleep in memory and learning, investigating decision-making processes, studying the neuronal mechanisms underlying cognitive impairments in epilepsy, examining information coding in olfaction, and developing brain-inspired AI algorithms. To tackle these research questions, Dr. Bazhenov employs a diverse range of methodologies, including computational neuroscience, machine learning, and electrophysiology. I'm so pleased to welcome you today, Dr. Bazhenov, and we look forward to learning from you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to speak here. And it's a great pleasure. I learned a little bit more about myself from introduction. Again, thanks for a very nice introduction. So just to mention my own background in physics and math, I have been doing computational neuroscience most of my kind of adult life. And recently we are trying to apply some of the ideas we learned from brain to machine learning algorithms. Even though this is not sort of main expertise of my lab. But because of that, expertise in the room, sort of motivation for my talk from mentioning certain principles of AI, which are both good and bad. So we know artificial intelligence is getting lots of attention, especially recently with this beautiful things such as ChatGPT. There are lots of advances have been developed over years medical diagnostics, for audio-video processing, translation. Self-driving cars still have a promise. So it all sounds great. However, even most advanced machine learning models such as ChatGPT, they suffer from number of very well described problems, which some of them listed on the slide on the screen. So one of them is catastrophic forgetting. So even most powerful models, let's say transformers using natural language processing models such as ChatGPT, they suffer from what is called catastrophic forgetting. Essentially, they can be very good in learning sort of specific task. However, if completely new information drop in to be used to train those models, it actually leads to damage to the old information and forgetting. I will show you a very simple example in a second. Another one is lack of generalization. So, for example, if we would train AI model on a certain type of data with certain statistics, example, some daylight images, etc., they may show very nice performance on this type of data. However, performance will degrade significantly with even minor changes, such as adding some noise or changing lighting conditions, etc. And we all know about that AI is prone to adversarial attacks. Very few changes to the pixels of the image, if you're talking about some image classification networks, can lead to completely different outcome, even though for human eyes it would be totally indistinguishable from original image. So this is a very simple example of catastrophic forgetting on the left. It's a well-known MNIST data set when network is trained to recognize those handwritten digits. The task is super simple, can be trained to 90+% performance on like set of 10 perceptrons. And obviously any decent network, minimal network can be trained to recognize it to up to 95-98%. Again, the task is built in the sense that network train on some of these images and then it's presented another one and it's supposed to say is it 3 or 4 or 5 or whatever. However, if we break that simple kind of task into few subtasks, for example, we will combine first 5 digits into one data set and another 5 digits in the second data set and train them sequentially. What you see on this plot on the right, the blue line shows performance on the first task, and it's very quickly reach high level. However, as soon as we start training network on the second task, performance on the first task will drop to 0 immediately. Again, this is called catastrophic forgetting. It's a well-known problem in machine learning, and pretty much all machine learning models, even most powerful one, are prone to this problem. There are some solutions which have been proposed over years to deal with that. However, the problem is still unsolved. This is just another example of the same problem when we just train the same model, each digit sequentially. So each task is 1 digit, and you can see it can learn one task, 1 digit perfectly. But as soon as next digit is trained, performance drops to 0 on the previous task. Another problem, which I mentioned earlier, is lack of generalization. And this is a very nice paper published in NIPS years ago. What it shows that network can be trained on one type of images. For example, this color birds in top left corner of where you see multiple versions of the birds. And it can show very nice performance on that. However, as soon as network presented to process images which for our eyes are totally classifiable, such as black and white version or rotated version or some noisy version, performance can drop to pretty much, it's not a chance, but very low level. So like second column in this big table shows network trained on color images, 96% performance, but as long as you start presenting it with different sort of type of perturbations, performance drops to like below 20% or something. Importantly, it's not the problem to process those images with noise or something. A network can be trained on noisy images. If you look at some other columns in this in the same table, so diagonal shows performance on type of images network have been trained on. So if you use, for example, salt and pepper noise on the kind of second row from bottom, it can get 80% performance, but then it cannot process color images. So again, it's not a problem of training network to recognize black and white or noisy images. It's a problem that the network trained on one type of images with one type of statistics, it cannot really process other types. It's interesting. Like, a couple days ago, when I was logging in somewhere, usually given a task kind of to tell if I'm human or not by recognizing some digits, etc. And that time, the task I was given to basically pick up some images which match some master image, and those images I was considering were sort of black and white or noisy or rotated, essentially what is shown here. Okay, another problem is also well described as kind of machine learning algorithms kind of subject to what is called adversarial attacks. Essentially, what it means, changing just a few pixels in the image can completely fool the network. So those two pandas on top, for our eyes, both are pandas, but the right one recognizes a gibbon just because a few pixels have been changed in this image. And there are some more, this is simple gradient kind of based attacks. There are more sophisticated ones. But obviously, it's a problem because some adversarial can easily change sort of image, and a few stickers on the stop sign can make it looks like yield sign, etc. So this is kind of those few slides I showed are our motivation for trying to learn from brain, how brain works, and trying to apply this knowledge to those artificial neural networks, because we know that humans and animals are very good in processing, learning continuously, learning from few examples, one-shot learning, improving from previous knowledge, generalization, etc. So this was, again, a motivation for our recent efforts to apply sleep to machine learning algorithms, because to a reasonable extent, we believe that sleep may be one of the important factors which contribute to humans' ability to, again, process knowledge in such an efficient way. Okay, so this is outlines of my talk. I will first speak kind of about sleep, properties of sleep, what we know about sleep, then what we know about role of sleep in memory and learning, and finally, I will show some applications, some of our lab results about studying sleep in biophysical models and in different kind of in some machine learning algorithms. So so sleep structure. Again, we spend about a third of our life sleeping, and the brain is very active during sleep. If you would pick up a single message from my talk, it would be that brain activity during sleep is very complex. It's very precise. It's highly stereotyped across living being. For example, patterns of activity found in humans, described in rodents, and down to even primitive organisms such as lizards. And sleep in general have been shown to exist and play a role in memory and learning, which I'm going to talk more about a bit later. In insects and in C. elegans, I honestly don't know any creature which wouldn't be having sleep. And for example, in insects and honeybees, this is bottom plot shows a recent work which illustrates that honeybees would have different sleep stages, just like humans. Again, on top left, you see normal sleep structure when we go from awake to stage 1 to 3 3 and 4 commonly combine together sleep, which is kind of deep sleep. Then we rebound back to what is called REM sleep. And towards the morning, we have more and more REM sleep and less of deep sleep. REM sleep when we see dreams. And in the honeybee, again, we see the pattern of electrical activity are different, and we cannot call the sleep rapid eye movement versus not rapid eye movement as we do in vertebrates. However, we still have more active and less active phases of sleep, which kind of serve as a equivalence of REM versus non-REM in vertebrates. There are a few very characteristic patterns of electrical activity found during sleep. What you see in the middle is called sleep spindles, which is essentially activity 7 to 14 hertz generated in thalamus, found in like kind of not very deep sleep, stage 2. And as we go to deeper sleep, down to the right, to stage 3-4, we'll have slow activity in the range of below 1 to 1.2 hertz, which is called delta wave or slow oscillations. Just a few words. I don't know if it's again, apologies if it's well known for many in this room, but essentially those EEG signals, which I will show in my talk, this is a slide just to illustrate what actually EEG is about. So if you have a bunch of neurons which spike, they generate currents as spike is happening, and then bunch of channels opens and closed. And if neurons spike kind of out of synchrony to each other, then common signal coming from them would be more or less flatline, as you see on the kind of left part of this image. On the right side, you will see what happens if they start to spike together. So when we're talking about some pattern of electrical activity seen on EEG, because EEG pick up activity from lots of neurons, it means that many of them do something in common, fire and synchrony, as we call it. The synchronized activity can be kind of normal or pathological. On the left, on this plot, you will see sort of normal slow oscillations. Below is, well, actually middle is a single cell, and top of the slide is EEG. And then we see example of one pathological activity, epileptic seizure, when neurons become highly synchronized. And so you can see that patterns could be very complex. And what relevant for my talk today is what you see on the left side, which is example of slow oscillations, which I will talk quite a bit about. Again, this is example of sleep spindles, and we can look at single cell. We know quite well how sleep spindles look at cellular level, at network level. This is delta waves or slow waves happens during deeper phases of sleep. Again, on the right side, single cell and in EEG. So we know quite a bit about how these rhythms are generated. So what is shown in this slide is it's illustration of those few rhythms. I mentioned slow oscillations and spindle, as well as shockwave ripples, which is another important activity found during sleep and wake as well, actually. And on the left are brain regions involved in generating those rhythms. So slow oscillations are known to generate in the cortex, spindle and thalamus, shockwave ripples in hippocampus. But importantly, those activities interacting a lot during sleep to contribute to memory and learning. Now, if you talk about sleep, there are lots of functions of sleep, and I don't want you to get impressions that sleep, the only thing sleep is doing is contributing to memory and learning, which is what I will be talking about for the rest of my talk. But here I would like to mention that we know quite well that sleep, for example, involve a lot in regulating immune system. And there are some studies when mice models with sleep disruptions, they show a high rate of tumor growth. Sleep involved in related to Alzheimer's disease. We don't know exactly what is chicken, what is egg here, because on one hand, deep sleep specifically, is abnormal in Alzheimer's patients, especially in kind of severe version of disease. On the other hand, we know that during deep sleep, extracellular space expands, and this is an opportunity for brain to remove all these amyloids and all this kind of stuff, which is not good for brain. So when we lack deep sleep, this function is kind of affected and in a negative way. So there are some studies again in mice when mice model of Alzheimer, when introducing slow wave, enhancing slow wave by optogenetics would improve removal of again beta amyloids and leads to better sort of progression of a less severe disease. Yeah, this is we'll see a short video in a second. This is maybe most extreme version showing importance of sleep. This is actually very interesting but unfortunate scenario because of some genetic mutation happening a few hundred years ago in a specific family, in one particular family in Italy, I believe. What happens, what it did, it's affected some protein folding in thalamus, which we don't quite yet understand fully how it's related to what it does, but what it does, it prevents people who would have it from going to deep sleep. Another thing is that disease kind of dormant till age of 20 plus, and at some point these mutations start to work again for reasons we don't quite understand. And when it's happening, people die within a few weeks, few months, and lots of problems they have are related to memory loss and essentially complete exhaustion at the end from being not able to
Other patients performing gestures like combing their hair or washing their hands or handling objects.
Silvano and the others were unable to drop into a deep REM sleep, and sleep medications only accelerated their restless descent toward death.
We gave intravenous doses of barbiturates in an attempt to help the patient sleep. The result was that they went from this pre-sleep, non-sleep to deep coma without ever passing through a sleep stage.
Okay, so again, this is a very extreme example of what happens in case of lack of sleep. And one thing that was mentioned is memory loss. And this is what I'm going to talk about for the rest of my talk. Just a brief summary. There are different types of memories which all, we believe, depends on sleep, but in somewhat different way. I don't have time to discuss it in great details, but in general, there are declarative memories, which are hippocampus dependent, which are memories of facts and events, like multiplication table. And there are procedural memories, which are presumably not hippocampal dependent, and they're examples of them are skills like riding a bike or playing tennis, and etc. So there is a long and very comprehensive literature about studies to prove that sleep leads to improvements in memory performance. This is one of them when subject is asked to learn word pairs, for example, riverboat, and later presented with the first word and supposed to complete the task. And it can be done after a certain time with or without having a sleep in between. What you see below, where arrows points performance, so having a wake or REM sleep doesn't help with this type of memory. I should say that performance always reduces over time for this type of memory, but if sleep is present, this slow wave sleep, SWS, stands for deep sleep, slow wave sleep, this forgetting is much less than when person would stay in awake or only having REM sleep. REM sleep, on the right side, you will see a higher bar, which shows that REM sleep actually helps to improve skill performance. Other kind of studies using some pharmacology, which can be used to enhance, for example, sleep spindles. So on the right side, you will see spindles per minute, and when those ambient drugs are applied, it's increased density of spindles. And in the middle, you see red bar has kind of highest, shows performance in presence of, again, this kind of sleep enhancement. This is a study when sleep was enhanced by using some stimulation Auditory stimulation, auditory tone can be applied during sleep without awakening person, and they shown to improve sleep, specifically slow oscillation during deep sleep. So on the bottom, you see this red line. It would be slow waves in presence of stimulation, and black one without. So there are more slow waves. And on the middle, panel C shows that performance for memory task would be higher for those subjects. This was on the healthy patients, healthy subjects, for those who was experiencing the stimulation, which actually opens a very interesting opportunity to manipulate sleep. And there are quite a bit of efforts to do it, because it's not invasive, and it's a very efficient tool. It can be done in closed loop manner when EEG is monitored and then stimuli applied in the right phase. In fact, it only works when they apply in the right phase. So those rhythms I mentioned, slow oscillations, spindles, ripples, interestingly, they generated in the different parts of the brain. Slow oscillations is a kind of cortical network feature. Spindles are originated in thalamus, ripples in hippocampus. But not just those rhythms are needed for memory and learning, but kind of nice coordination between them is also important. This is from human studies, which show what you see on the left top is the black line is inversed kind of EEG signal. So the peak would show down state of slow oscillation, and the trough on the right, for example, would show up state. And this red blob in frequency band around 15 hertz are spindles, so they nicely organized, nested by slow oscillation. And below you see ripples nested by spindles, this bunch of red spots in the frequency around maybe 70, 80 hertz, which is frequency of ripples in humans. In many mental disorders, there are some abnormalities in those rhythms, and the abnormalities leads to also memory deficits. For example, this is in schizophrenia. It has been shown, described very well, that spindle density is reduced. Like panel C shows in gray. So the black one would be power spectrum of normal person, and the gray one would be power spectrum of a subject which suffer from schizophrenia. So the power reduced significantly in the frequency band around 13, 14 hertz, which is spindle band. And on the right side, we see in gray would be overnight improvements for control subjects, and in black for subjects suffering from schizophrenia. Okay, so just a few summary points. So we know that memory for instant learning improves after a period of sleep or nap, and this process is called memory consolidation. So different types of sleep, REM versus non-REM, affect different types of memory, declarative versus procedural. And there are different types of manipulation, pharmacology, or stimulation, which can improve consolidation. So next question is why and how sleep affects memory consolidation. And the short answer is that firing patterns of neurons found during training can be reactivated spontaneously during sleep. So let me expand this point in more details. So what you see on the slide, on the right slide is illustration of what is known as a STTP rule for synaptic plasticity between neurons, which means that if two neurons connected by synapse and they spike in order, like A neuron spike before B neuron, the timing A to B would be positive and synapse between them would get stronger. If B neuron spike before A, then timing is negative and it will reduce synaptic strength between them. So if you have a network, brain network, which are essentially lots of neurons connected with lots of synapses, when we learn certain tasks, those neurons spike in specific order. So those in red shown some group of neurons which activated in this case kind of left to right order, which maybe represent certain task. I will show example in a second. And another task can be another group of neurons activated in another kind of order. So what happens because of this STDP rule, synapses between them will get stronger, and A neuron will be connected stronger to B neuron to the right, and C, D, and so on. So example, well, where it's actually was described very well first. This is a place cell in hippocampus. When rat moves in maze, those cells spike, and when it's getting to specific location. So there is a specific order of cell spiking as this animal moves along the maze. For example, cell 4 spike before cell 2, then followed by cell 1, and then cell 3. So synapses from that cell 4 to cell 2 to cell 1 to cell 3 will be enhanced during awake. So now the point is that once it happens, this is a cartoon based on very significant paper by Matt Wilson, published 15 years ago, which shows example of in the middle animal kind of learning certain task and certain neuron firing specific order, reds and blues and greens and yellow. So that the CDP rule I mentioned will increase synapses between them. And what happens during sleep? During sleep, there is no sensory input. There is no movements which would trigger place cell to spike in specific order. However, because synapses already enhanced, so red to blue cell is stronger than some other random synapse in this network. When network activated spontaneously during all these rhythms I described earlier, connection from red to blue will further enhance, and blue to green, and green to yellow, and so on. So this process is called replay. It also was shown that replay happens kind of in faster scale than original play. And I think this point was shown nicely in the movie. I keep forgetting the name of this movie, but lots of you saw it when sort of the main hero, he was going to sleep, and actually few sleep levels, and at each level he was replaying previous experience in faster and faster scale. This is just original data illustrating it. So, for example, if you look at the right side, during run, bottom shows LFP in hippocampus, and you see order of spiking, red, gray, purple. And the same order is repeated during sleep. On the left, it shows same kind of idea, but now recordings from cortical neurons. So this coordination of replay between cortex and hippocampus is pretty important, and I don't have time to talk about this in details, but it happened during those ripples, and they should come in the right timing to in respect to slow waves in cortex to actually make it working. Now, just a bit conceptual point. So I'm not maybe going to discuss it too much in detail later, but I would like to. I mentioned earlier that there are hippocampus-dependent and independent type of memories, procedural, which is happening presumably without involvement of hippocampus, at least active, and declarative, which involve hippocampus. And this plot shows essentially framework what we believe is happening when we learn declarative memories. The sensory input come to thalamus project to the cortex. It's activate to cortex some features, and those features then create new memory trace in hippocampus. So, for example, if we learn about specific scene somewhere on the street, we already know subject. We learned about them before, the person, a car, maybe a tree. But having them together is a new memory we are learning, and so hippocampus kind of learns how to connect those dots. And then during sleep, interplay between hippocampus and cortex on the right side, this big arrow, red arrow, shows how these two system interact to kind of leads to consolidation. It's interesting, again, example of from clinical work when a subject had his hippocampus severely resected because of disease, and that subject was able to learn new skills because new skills such as like playing piano, as they presumably hippocampus independent, but he would never remember learning them, and he would never remember learning facts which or events which depend on hippocampus. Never was able to learn declarative memories. Again, in case of procedural memory skills, It may happen without direct involvement of the hippocampus. Again, when we learn something like playing tennis, certain movements reactivated in motor cortex, and then during sleep they would be reactivated spontaneously. But it's usually a much slower process. It takes whole life to learn tennis, and not always successful, even after many years. And in that sense, this is a different type of, again, learning which may be happening without hippocampal involvement. Okay. So on the one hand, what I described sounds like we know a lot about how sleep works to help with memories and learning. And there are a few fundamental ideas. One I describe hopefully in depth. Replay idea, meaning that patterns of activation of neurons trained and awake spontaneously reactivated during sleep to improve memories. There is a point about important notion of dual memory theory, which I briefly mentioned, when hippocampus learns first and then cortex learns from hippocampus during sleep. Hippocampal indexing, which I can mentioned very briefly. Hippocampus store information about high-level features, and cortex already have like more basic features which needs to be connected for specific memory. And there are lots of things we don't know. We don't know, for example, why we need REM and non-REM sleep. We don't know how sleep may contribute to forgetting. This is actually a very fascinating topic because there is a very well-studied group of people, maybe about 100, who never forget things about themselves. So they can be asked what happens with them 30 years ago on the morning of, January 21st, and they would remember exactly what they were doing, what they were reading, and etc. It means that forgetting is not kind of, it's not manifestation of our inability to sustain information. It's actually active process, and we now know that sleep also involved in forgetting. There are some other types of activity, delta oscillations, which play a role in forgetting during sleep, which still very early in our studies. And for me, again, it's a fascinating example of that memory is both learning new information, forgetting new information is very active process. And again, we believe that sleep contributes to both of them. So how we can learn about what sleep is doing? So this part of my talk actually have a few outlines, but they are more technical, so I will probably just describe more briefly each of them. So first, I will talk about some group of studies when we use biophysical models to understand what sleep is doing. And what I mean by that, this example of model which we can design. Like I said earlier, we know quite a bit about how neurons work, how they interact. So we can design a model simulating individual neurons, individual synapses between them. And what is important, we can also simulate transition between different sleep stages in this and awake in this model. So in this big green kind of plot, you see awake state on the left, then we change something in the model which, again, simulate changes in neuromodulation. And the network goes to stage 2 with spindles, and it goes to stage 3 with slow oscillations. We can put it to REM sleep, back to stage 2, etc. So this gives us actually a tool to train memories in awake state and see what happens with them during different sleep stages and so on and so on. Now, this is results from one kind of simpler model, but I want to show our current kind of some of very much work in progress results when we trying to use data which become available sort of recently when we're trying to simulate whole human brain. This is model built on diffusion MRI data. On the left, you see kind of connectome when whole brain divided into 360 parcels, 180 per hemisphere, and then we can infer connection between them from diffusion MRI data, and we can put them to the model, and we can manipulate with those connectivity and see what it does with, for example, slow waves. What's shown here is different types of slow activity. Some of them looks like in healthy subjects. Some of them would remind certain disease state. And this model will include a few 100,000 neurons, a few tens of millions of synapses, and it can be, in extreme version, personalized to represent one specific brain. This is another type of activity I mentioned. On the right, you see spindle waves, and we can simulate activity on kind of electrical grid. And on the left, we compare the simulated activity in B column with empirical one, measure it in epileptic patients when actually grid is embedded to determine placement for surgery to treat epilepsy. So going back to memory and learning, so what we can do with those models, we can train certain pattern. And what I will call memory trace in this type of models is somewhat quite simple. We can make model to learn a sequence. If you remember, I mentioned that, for example, rat moving to the maze, cell fire in specific order and synapses between them can get stronger. So you can think about this as a group of cells which spike in specific order, in this case, network learning sequence, B, A, C, E, etc. And we can test how well it learns it by activating the first letter B. And in case of rat, this memory trace is supposed to reactivate and make the rat to find a piece of cheese very quickly after it learned the structure of the maze. So we can test it before sleep and after sleep. What is shown here in the red second plot is before sleep. Now we can, like I said, we can take network I described earlier, we can train that memory trace, we can test it before sleep, then we can simulate sleep. Indeed, we see increase of performance after training before sleep. But now if we have a sleep, we will have significant increase in accuracy. So this allows us to actually, because we have access to every neuron, every synapse in this model, it allows us to understand what's happening. I don't have time to actually, before. This is another example when we try to train two memories which compete to each other. So let's say we train sequence 1, which is very simple sequence in this case. It's just linear 1, A, B, C, D, E. But then we also want to train another sequence which is opposite to that, involves same group of neurons. So we first train this sequence to the network. We have a sleep. It's consolidated. The red bar on the bottom shows high performance after sleep. Then we train a second sequence which involve, like I said, same neurons, but order of activation is different. Now EDCBA. And you can see that on the right side, on the bottom right, performance for second memory improves. But performance for the first memory in the middle bottom plot reduces because now we have what is called catastrophic forgetting in very simple version, what I mentioned earlier. New memory learning start to damage old one. Now, if you have a sleep, you see performance improves for both memories, which is actually, in a sense, quite amazing because whatever happens during sleep, somehow it figures out how to reactivate both of those memories, sequence 1 and sequence 2, in a way that both of them are getting better after sleep. So what we know, this is kind of conceptual one. What we learned from this study is that on the top right, kind of cartoon of this sequence, when we learn just first memory. So group of neurons activated in order E, B, C, D, E, synapses from A to B, B to C, etc. get stronger, and all resources can be allocated to that memory. If you start training second one, the second row, second memory, red one memory start taking over the blue one, and now synapses from like B to A and C to B become stronger and stronger. And if you continue doing it, the third row, essentially second memory, will take over the network and first one would be erased. However, if sleep is implemented in kind of right time, this is what's shown on the bottom, what we believe is happening. This is sort of prediction from this life paper published a couple years ago. Sleep helps network to segregate resources between tasks, between memories. Now, some subset of neurons in each group would be responsible for first memory task and another one for second one. And during sleep, they would be reactivated, we showed in this study, spontaneously and simultaneously during up states of slow wave. So at the end, we will have strong representation of blue memory and red memory. And for me, it also shows very interesting example of what we start calling a reconsolidation, meaning that original representation of memory may change over time. I mean, we used to believe that one memory is formed, it's kind of stored forever in pattern of synaptic weights. And what those recent studies suggest that it's not true. As we learn new things which kind of compete or interfere or interact with old memories, a representation of old memories may change too. The second study I would like to describe kind of briefly is a recent paper we published in October. And interestingly, that paper got quite a bit of attention from media because it was kind of pointing towards application of sleep to artificial intelligence. However, that study wasn't yet much about artificial intelligence. We used somewhat maybe more interesting from task perspective, but on the other hand, somewhat more simple model, which, by the way, what I'd like to point, this was in the middle bottom, on the right bottom, you see this title from Wall Street Journal article, Does AI Dreams of Electric Ships? And obviously it's referred to very well novel from, not remember when it was written, Does Androids Dream of Electric Ships, written probably 30, 40 years ago. So what was this paper about? We try to model somewhat more interesting task, but using a bit more simplified version of the network. So in this case, we had an agent who's supposed to live in this virtual environment you see on the left. So all the inputs it can get, those bars of different orientation, and the network is trained to sort of to eat good bars, which are horizontal one, but avoid bad one, which are vertical patterns. So it can be trained very easily using reinforcement learning. And I will skip details how it works. So this is on the left network, naive network. It's moved, agent moves randomly. I should say agent doesn't have access to entire environment. It's only see, I think it's 7 by 7 box around it. So it's kind of moving randomly, and once it see right particle, it should grab it, and if it see wrong particle, it should avoid it. On the right side, you will see train creature, which kind of moving nicely, just picking up only horizontal bars. We can make more complex tasks when we have 4 types of patterns in the environment, vertical, horizontal, and 2 different orientation, right to left, left to right. And we can break them into 2 tasks. So task 1 would be learning that horizontal one are good and kind of this diagonal orientation of one type is bad, and task 2 would be other two patterns. So what we found, again, this network can learn this task, each task very well. So this is performance of the network in blue after training task 1. So it very quickly learns the task, and then you see the task is trained in green bar, in green kind of vertical bar. So it shows high performance. The second task haven't been yet trained, so performance very low. Then we train the second task, and if we test performance, we see again example of catastrophic forgetting. Now the first task shows random chance performance, but the second task in this yellow bar shows high performance. And on the middle, you can see this kind of accuracy bars. So essentially, network completely forgetting first task and learn second task. So what if we change strategy? What if instead of training second task alone, we will interleave training second task with sleep? This is a case when we present task 2 for a short period of time, and then we simulate sleep in this network, which is simulated by removing sensory input, applying some noise to the network, and let synaptic plasticity to change synapses. So if you test performance, you can see that in this case, both boss task shows very high performance, which is nice, what we wanted, and we also try to explore why it's happening, and it's a bit technical, but what is shown, these distributions, kind of synaptic weights. We can select synaptic weights which are important for each task. So top left shows distribution of those weights after training task 1. If you move to the right, after training task 2, those weights are pretty much gone. All of them most of them to this big bar at 0. Then if you do interleave training following training task 2 on the right in red box, you can see that, so in this case, we interleave, we train task 1 back, which was forgotten, and interleave it with sleep. We can see that, again, network recovers some of these original weights. But what is most interesting was shown green bar. So in the middle, we show distribution of weights after training task 2. So those are weights which are important for task 2. If you move to the right, some of them are erased, but lots of those weights remains. And it was no training on task 2 for distribution shown on the right. What was happening, it was training task 1, interleaving training task 1 with sleep. So again, it's a bit technical, but it basically shows that replay during sleep can protect memory. And at the end, we have synaptic weights representing both memories present in the network, and that's why it shows good performance. Okay, let me move to the last part of my talk. I already mentioned that artificial neural networks are subject to catastrophic forgetting. So the question we ask, can we actually try to implement something like sleep in artificial neural network trained using machine learning algorithms and get similar effect to protect memories which would otherwise be damaged by new training. So this is a paper published just a few months ago, and here I'd like to emphasize, we deal with, I should say, my lab is not technically computer science machine learning lab, so we learned lots of the stuff over the last few years when we're working on this project. So what we have in this case, we have a network which would be normal deep learning network. Lots of example, I will show you kind of simple networks with a couple hidden layers, but we since then we also apply this approach to convolutional networks and more complex network architectures, etc. So we train it to some task using standard backpropagation, and then after training new class, we would observe what is called catastrophic forgetting. So what we propose that if you implement a sleep phase after that, and then we go back to kind of artificial neural network, and how we implement sleep I will summarize in a sec. That network will actually remember not just a new task, but also all the task trained before. So sleep implementation, it sounds a bit complicated, but in reality it's all simple implemented in PyTorch, so it doesn't really, and it's very efficient, so it's not really taking a lot of resources. So what we do some scaling to synaptic weights, and we kind of simulate spiking activity in this network, meaning we feed it with random inputs. So nodes would be active. In case of feed-forward network, we will have kind of spike train propagating from left to right. We will implement local learning rules. So synapses still change, but they change by kind of analogous of that STDP rule I showed earlier in my talk, when depending on the order of spiking, synapse may get stronger or weaker. So sleep modify weights, and then we scale synaptic weights back to how they should be for artificial neural network, and we can test network again. So, but our hypothesis was that that spontaneous activity during sleep phase can reactivate those old memory traces which may not show up during testing before sleep, because new memories kind of took over the network. But if they still present, if those synaptic weights are still stronger than baseline, they can be reactivated, and that can help to enhance them and recover old memories. So we tested this on different data set. We look at MNIST data set. We test Fashion MNIST, CFAR 10. Since then, we also show it for CFAR 100. So this is example of how we frame the problem in case of MNIST. So for example, you can break all the 10 digits into 5 tasks, 2 digits per task. I'd like to say that network we are talking about here perfectly capable to learn all 10 digits and get perfect performance. But if it would be trained by those tasks sequentially, so first couple digits and then another couple digits, they will keep forgetting everything learned before immediately after new task started to be trained. So this is example. So on the blue on the left, you show performance for each task after sort of training given task. So for example, we first train task 3, which is digit 4 and 5. So network is perfectly capable to recognizing those. Then we implement sleep. It's not needed in this case, and it actually hurt performance a bit. But then we train task 4, which is 6 and 7. And you see that now it shows perfect performance on digit 6 and 7, but zero performance on 4 and 5, we learned before. So if you implement sleep after that, again, we have some loss of performance for most recent task, but we gain almost all performance on all the tasks trained before. So then we train task 2, and this order is totally random. We can change it. There's nothing special about this order of task. 95% performance on digit 2 and 3, but everything else is forgotten, and then there is recovery, and so on. So at the end of the day, we see that network performance is not perfect, so it's not 100%, but it's definitely what is shown on the bottom is overall performance, and after last training, it's 20% because it's only does correct identification for 2 digits out of 10, and it's 70% if you implement sleep after each training phase. We also showed that this method can be actually very nicely combined with what is called rehearsal. Rehearsal is pretty much state-of-the-art currently to deal with catastrophic forgetting. And what it means that after task is trained, a small fraction of data, well, how small it is, it depends on how good performance you may want to get at the end, is actually stored forever. And if 10 tasks are trained, we store some data from all 10 tasks. And when task number 11 is trained, we mix new data with some fraction of this old data. So it's kind of fine-tuning. It helps to prevent forgetting. But obvious downsides that we need to store, or alternatively, we need to use some generative models, some variation autoencoders, for example, to generate those data. But we need some data representing all tasks mixed with new one to avoid forgetting. So what we show is that we can combine that with sleep, and then we can get state-of-the-art performance using less data than those methods would need otherwise. So here, red lines would be performance when we combine rehearsal plus sleep. In this case, we use iCarl, and for rehearsal method, and gray one when we don't. You see that as we reduce amount of data stored, kind of on the left of this plot, performance usually degrades for those methods, and combining with sleep can help get higher performance. We did quite a bit of exploration in the study to understand what happens during sleep. We found that having sleep leads to sparse representation. This is showing correlation between classes. So, for example, before SRC, like diagonal would show correlation of zeros with other zeros, and other off-diagonal blocks would show correlation between activations and given layer, between zeros when zeros and ones, for example, presented. So when it shows how similar network activity is when it's presented with digit 0 and 0, 1, for example, or 0 and 0, 2. So diagonal is supposed to be high and off diagonal is supposed to be low. And you can see that before sleep, those off diagonal elements are pretty high, and after sleep, they reduce significantly. And diagonal also reduce a bit, but it still stays higher. Now the kind of difference is much higher and representation is much sparser. We can also look what happens during sleep, and here we can look at specific neurons in the network during this kind of simulated sleep and see which one are more active. And we can select those which are responsible for specific task. So basically what it shows that neurons which are involved in recall of 0, 1, and 2, and 3 would be more active during sleep than some random neurons, which kind of suggests that what network does, it's reactivate those patterns by having those neurons activated randomly. So this is another layer. And I mentioned earlier a problem with generalization when network is trained on, let's say, on clean images and presented with something else, some noisy images, its performance drops significantly, like in the middle bottom plot. Blue line shows performance when we increase Gaussian noise intensity. So it drops very quickly and on x-axis is a kind of sigma of that noise. So high number network is more noisy. And we can see that if we run this network through the sleep replay consolidation algorithm, performance is improved significantly for broad range of noise conditions. This is for CFR10 dataset. We also can show that network trained, let's say, only on nice bright images on the left can do bad processing kind of images which of the same scenes, so same objects taken in dusk, and after sleep it's also improved. It's interesting that what SRC seems to be doing for convolutional networks, it makes them to look at the right place of the image. This is example of what is called grad cam visualization, which shows what part of the image network have been using to decide what it is. And middle, let's say if you look at in this top row, this original digit ones, and then what happens before sleep, but it looking, in this case, at some almost random points in this. And this is just one example. I mean, in reality, it's maybe not that bad. But it definitely doesn't focus on all the right pixels representing one. And after SRC, it's pretty much focused on those pixels which represent, which are important to classify that image. This is for CFR10. So conclusion is that so sleep replay can be implemented in artificial neural network to improve continual learning. It doesn't completely solve catastrophic forgetting problem, and on the other hand, our implementation of sleep is extremely simplified. It's more like we just simulating maybe REM sleep alone. We're now trying actually to simulate some sort of waves traveling through receptive field through the input of the network during sleep, which helping surprisingly and kind of fortunately for some type of problems. So my final slide is acknowledgement to people in my lab who did all the work, including former lab members who contributed to that study, my collaborators, and our support from different agencies. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Maxim, for that wonderful lecture. We have a little bit of time now for some questions that have come in from the audience. So just as a reminder to our folks who are watching online, to use the question icon to the right of your screen. I'll try and select a broad range of questions, and yeah, we should be good to go. So I'll start with one of the first questions that came in. So the first question says, thank you for the presentation. How common is it in your experience to find parallels in the biological, natural environment to advance artificial intelligence?
Well, it's a great question, and I should say this is what we are trying to do. I maybe to be more specific, I would like to mention another project when we believe what we can learn from neuroscience can improve artificial intelligence. It's called problem of multimodal integration. So we know artificial intelligence network, machine learning networks are pretty good to process individual modalities, but combining them together is a problem. I mean, there are some solutions for this problem, but obviously brain is extremely good in combining pieces together. So when we learn something, when we learn certain, when we learn to recognize, for example, certain animals, we definitely not relying just on image of them. We also relying on how they sound and etc. And so it happens in higher levels in the cortex. So up to a certain point, let's say auditory stream and visual stream are processed kind of independently, but then in associative cortex, they combine together, and we make decision based on that plus millions of other factors which are involved. So for example, we have a project when we trying to improve processing by combining background and foreground information, kind of try to mimic what associative cortex is doing, and it kind of makes sense. If we see something in the skies, it's probably unlikely to think it's a cat. It's more likely it's a helicopter or balloon or plane. So that's kind of basic idea, and we always use this knowledge to improve our understanding, our processing. So again, I give an example. In general, I personally believe that we can learn a lot from how brain does things, and this knowledge can be applied to improve artificial intelligence. It doesn't mean that at the end we will have to create something analogous of our brain to get kind of perfect performance and to achieve what we're trying to achieve. But certainly there are many things we can learn and we can apply to machine learning.
Wonderful, thank you. The next question that we have says, if the mind consolidates information at night, is it better for students to study closer to bedtime?
I wouldn't go too far trying to make very practical predictions from those studies. It's definitely true that having no sleep between end of study and, let's say, exam is bad. And I guess many of you know that. And in fact, I experienced myself many times. You're thinking about something, you have lots of pieces, and you trying to make sense of them, and it's a bit messy. And in the morning, they become much clearer. In fact, what happens? Those ideas I discuss about, let's say, protecting all memories and generalization. It's just a slice of what we believe brain is doing during sleep. We have some studies in biophysical models showing that brain can help to sleep can help to learn certain, let's say, relationship. We can train subjects to learn association between things like face and one type of subject, and then one type of object, and then same object and another face. And those two faces never presented together. So the task is to connect those faces. And after sleep, this performance on this task improves significantly, means that whatever brain is doing is creating kind of new knowledge to some degree, which again, what is important, sleep have been shown to help learn kind of more complex relationship, like A more than B more than C. And if you ask, is A more than C, is again, it's more complex task when we infer information from pieces we learn, but it's never have been trained directly, and sleep help with that. So going back to the question, I definitely would recommend to have a sleep. I don't think it's probably that much matter how soon before kind of specific sleep phase something is trained, but I would be careful to make very specific predictions from our studies or any studies of that kind.
Perfect, thank you. We have another question that's been upvoted by a number of our viewers today, and you may have touched on part of this, but I'll still ask it. The question is, are there limitations in using biology to inform us on how AI should work? Is it a safe assumption to assume that our AI algorithms should mimic what we see in biology?
again, it's related to the first question. And first of all, I'd like to say that the most successful training algorithm in machine learning, backpropagation, and it's used in different kind of flavors in pretty much all models, is very different from how biology learns, how biological system learn. I don't know if it's good or bad, and the main difference is that backpropagation kind of trying to calculate the error and based on that to update all the weights. So it's kind of global path to update multiple weights at once. All the training in biology, in biological system, happens at local scale. So what happens in one synapse largely independent from another one. Again, it's I don't know if it's good or bad. There are quite a bit of efforts trying to implement that kind of training to machine learning networks. And I like to emphasize, when what I described, we have local plasticity during sleep, but during awake training, we still have we use backpropagation. Otherwise, we just couldn't make network to learn complex tasks. There are efforts to overcome it, but they haven't been too successful yet. So again, I don't know it's a limitation or not. Clearly, there are some advantages of how biology does it. If you think about this from maybe kind of engineering perspective, in biological systems, kind of processing and memory are completely overlapping. So processing happens for synapses between cell, and memories are stored by the same synapses between cell. So we don't have a separate memory. And that's what potentially makes a biological system so energy efficient. And this is where there is lots of interest currently from different agencies. If we take we study olfaction, for example, in insects, and fly has maybe a few thousand neurons, and it's extremely efficient in solving very complex tasks. You probably experience yourself. You put a glass of wine next to you, and then fly, which maybe existed somewhere in very far away corner of the house, will fly there, finds it, and so it's a complex task, and we can try to solve it using existing algorithms, but it probably will take a cluster of GPUs and enormous amount of power, and that biological creature solving that task with very minimal energy consumption. So this is, again, saying something about so we definitely want to explore more and understand how biology works and to map it to AI. At the end of the day, we will have kind of very different type of machine learning, all based on biology, or somehow they will coexist, or some hybrid solutions would be kind of produced. Nobody knows, but definitely there is a lot to learn how biology solves those tasks, and that's what we are trying to do.
Thank you. The next question is about forgetting. So they ask, is there an advantage to forgetting?
Again, it's a fantastic question. I should say we have ongoing collaboration with a lab at UCSF where we actually planning to study using tools I described how forgetting works, and to some degree why it may be needed. I mentioned this cohort of people who cannot forget, and I should say that they have been studied a lot from different perspectives, but it's a healthy people, so they started like from psychological angles and so on. You may think they could become kind of Supermans because of that ability to remember everything, but they're not. They, in general, I mean, to put it kind of, I don't remember any very successful stories. Those people probably, if anything, were unsuccessful in their life because, at least for once, it's probably hard to live together with somebody who would remember exactly what happens 22 years ago at a certain day and certain time. So I think largely they're not married, and So it seems that from that perspective that there is a good thing, there is an importance in forgetting, because over kind of all these times which nature had in its hands to develop brains, evolution created forgetting, and from what I said, it doesn't have to be there. So from practical perspective, obviously, if we have limited capacity of the network, we want to erase certain things, but it's maybe more than that, because obviously we forget things before we saturate our brain, and so maybe when we remember too many things, there is too much interference, and again, it's a great question, and it haven't been really studied almost at all, except from at least kind of trying to understand mechanistic mechanism behind forgetting and functions of it. So there are some, what I mentioned about non-REM and REM sleep, there are some data showing that during REM sleep, there is some pruning of synapses. So some of them, those synapses which represent memories become kind of reduced to baseline. So maybe it's some sort of homeostatic mechanism involved. There are some actually works on that saying that sleep playing homeostatic role, and synapses kind of, lots of them brought back to baseline during sleep, and only some representing important memory states. I can keep talking about that, but I probably wouldn't be able to give a very specific answer, and it's a great question, and we hope to understand it.
Perfect, thank you. And I think we have time for probably about one more question, so I'll move on to the next one submitted by our audience. So the question is there any statistical difference about the pattern of sleep type between kids and adults?
I'm probably not the greatest person to ask this, because again, it's more question to clinicians. Clearly, there are differences in sleep patterns with aging, and if you include children to this process, we know that kids sleep more. And again, if you want to ask me about very young kind of toddlers and going down there, I probably wouldn't be able to give any informative answer. But if we start from teenagers and look in progression in time, there are, and this is what I personally believe is a reason for many health problems we develop with age, is that our sleep become much more disturbed, much more kind of fragmented. There are obviously some kind of clinical things which happens, like let's say apnea, sleep apnea. It's a disease, but light version of that. Probably to some degree, we all of us getting it as we get older. So our sleep become more fragmented. We don't stay that much in deep sleep. This whole obsession now with all these wearables, which shows how much deep sleep you have, 2 hours or 3 hours or 1 hour. So bottom line, there are lots of changes in sleep patterns over lifespan. And hopefully manipulations to sleep, which we can develop based on knowledge we are getting about how sleep works, may help improving sleep in older adults, which could also help to deal with some health problems, which some of this I mentioned in my talk, earlier in my talk.
Thank you so much, and just being conscious of time, I'm going to conclude our session here today. So I just wanted to thank you again so much, Maxim, for your lecture and for your remarks, as well as for answering some of our questions from our audience. I'd also like to thank all of my ATCO colleagues who've helped coordinate this lecture for today. And to everyone who's joined, thank you again for your interest, and we encourage you to check out our social media feeds for future speaker series sessions. Now, in the meantime, I just want to wish everybody a safe and an enjoyable rest of your day. So thank you, and thank you again.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank for wonderful questions. It was really nice to get new perspective and think about it, and maybe learn more from those questions as well. Thank you.